Nick Drake, who made 3 masterpieces and nothing else, right?
Yeah.
Every one of them is a masterpiece. Now, I'm one of those people that, depending on which day of the week it is and how I feel when I wake up, I could say any one of these 3 albums is
Yeah,
the
yeah.
best Nick Drake album. And there are plenty of days when I'll say Pink Moon is the best Nick Drake album. And there are plenty of days when I will say the best of Nick Drake is the best Nick Drake album. Five Leaves Left can be my favourite album some days. Brighter Later is my favourite. Pink Moon, there's something very special and very haunting about it because we know it was the last record he made.
Mm-hmm.
He did 4 songs later on, but he never finished a record. It's the last complete record he made. We know he made it essentially in just a couple of sessions. He was incredibly depressed, apparently. Recorded the whole album facing the wall, couldn't even look at the engineer John Wood in the eye. Recorded this 26 minutes of sublime but simple album with no arrangement ornamentation, apart from one piano line on the title track. It's just him and an acoustic guitar. And there's something very haunting about that in principle, but there's something also very haunting about the music anyway, isn't there?
There is. And the interesting thing, I suppose, the difference between this and the other albums, one, the absence of arrangements. As you said, this is really stark.
It's a true, so just like your new solo album, Tim, there's no one else on it.
Thank you. It's
Just
true.
a plug for Tim's album.
This is one of the few albums I've actually covered every single song on it, actually, yeah.
Really?
With obviously I've covered some with you, but I've also done some with Peter Chilvers as well.
Lord Chilvers?
Lord Chilvers. It's you know, it's gorgeous. It is quite stark. It is quite low. The other distinction beyond the absence of elaborate arrangements are that his voice is quite different on this. You were saying that he was staring at the wall while singing it. It's almost like he's murmuring to himself. Now, you could argue that could be an influence from one of his friends, John Martin. It's got more of a John Martin sounding singing. There's kind of a murmuring quality. Because in the previous albums, his enunciation is pretty crystal clear. He's still got quite a cloudy voice, but his enunciation is clear. On this album, it's almost words are blurring, a little like John Martin for my
And I wonder if that's
ears.
because the first 2 albums are produced by Joe Boyd, whereas this album...
And he's being told to sing or re-sing. Or...
I'm guessing. I mean, reading between lines. Whereas this album is just simply recorded by John Wood. I mean, there is no production.
You know, this is the ultimate album. Well, this year, along with, I would say, Mark Ullman too, where it's for no one but themselves. It's almost like they're in that studio, they're making this for themselves. There's almost a total obliviousness to the fact there's a world outside of this music being made.
And an expectation that no one else is going to listen to this record or buy this record.
Yeah.
That's the way it feels.
Totally.
And actually, sadly, prophetic in his lifetime, no one did buy that record. I think it sold like 800 copies at the time or something ridiculous. But of course, if ever there was a poster child for an album to be reappraised, well, the whole Nick Drake career in a way is the poster child for posthumous reappraisal, isn't it? I mean, it's been, his music pops up in adverts, in soundtracks. It's no musician in their right mind would fail to drop Nick Drake in as an influence these days, which is incredible when you think about his actual experience in life was being ignored. Completely ignored. These albums not selling at all.
Well, I was always interested. One description I think a critic gave of him, particularly during this period, was that he was a very lyrical and articulate guitarist while being a very hesitant vocalist. And I thought that was quite interesting. You've got this contrast. Because what's interesting is the melodies. And I guess this is why it sort of appealed to you and I when we're doing things like Pink Moon. And I realized that he almost sings in pockets. His singing is very sparse, but the music is surprisingly rapid, the finger-picking style and so on.
Yeah.
So there's a kind of an interesting thing that you've got almost 2 tempos going on at once with something like Pink Moon. But yeah, it's a glorious album and it's the most consistent. Like you, it depends on how I feel on a given day, because you could choose Five Leaves Left, you could choose Brighter Later as the best album. Any of them could be his definitive best album for different reasons. But this is interesting because it's a real contrast with Brighter Later that I guess is the pure anomaly of his trio of albums, in that there's a certain kind of optimism and a certain kind of embracing the world in that album, especially with the arrangements. And lest we forget, John Cale does some work on that album as well.
It's Brighter Later, the previous album, is a very, very producer-led arranged record with orchestral arrangements and session musicians, and it's got the 3 instrumentals on it as well. This album is stark by comparison, isn't it? What about the lyrics? I mean, you know, as a songwriter yourself, lyric writer yourself, there's something about the lyrics on this album for me that haunt me as well. Lines like then a movement in your brain sends you out into the rain. Those kind of lines. Maybe it's that kind of thing about knowing the history of the artist that makes you read more into it, that's actually there. But some of it seems almost prophetic. As if he knew he was going to die young.
As did the 4 songs that he did before he died as well. You know, again, why'd you leave me hanging on a star when you deemed me so high? And Black
Voice
Eyed
from
Dog.
the Mountain. But there's some of that on this record too. It feels to me, you know, like he's almost foreseeing his own untimely
there's something
death.
there's something very solitary about it. And I think that from a lyrical point of view, a little like the music, what I like is they've almost got that kind of haiku quality of suggesting more than they say.
We've got a listener review of Nick Drake's Pink Moon, so somebody else obviously feels this is a very important record from this year.
Either that or they hate it.
I doubt it somehow, Tim. Now, who could hate Pink Moon? Let's hear it, Rob.
My favorite album from 1972 is Nick Drake's Pink Moon. I found it as a teenager and fell in love with Drake's original style of making songs. The album has unusual chords, interesting melodies, and intriguing lyrics. It's sad the album was to be his last. After all, he was a singer-songwriter like no one else.
Thank you very much. Absolutely. I mean, he's utterly, utterly unique, isn't he? I mean, we put him in the finger to the ear, but it's very unfair because he kind of transcends really everything, doesn't he? I mean, he's just kind of out on his own. And
I mean, he started in that late 60s folk club environment.
Yeah, I mean, John Martin, as you say, is his friend John Martin would be the closest kind of comparison.
Yeah, early John Martin. But John Martin, by this stage, had branched out into soul, into funk, into, you know, they both were influenced by early blues as well. I think you can hear that in some of their
I think the
phrasing.
one thing I don't normally associate with folk rock is that fragility and frailty and vulnerability that Nick Drake almost uniquely has. At least within that genre, which I think has endeared him to so many people. He just kind of touches your heart in a way.
Well, he rarely performs well. You know what you don't get, unlike with Tim Buckley,
where every video of him at all,
every week there's a new Tim Buckley live at the Locarno or what have you. Great recordings of great concerts. You don't really get that with Drake. And I think famously, wasn't there one at the South Bank Royal Festival Hall where he was booked and he didn't do it, and they had, they always say there was a cardboard cutout. And in the very early days, and this would have been what an intriguing double bill, Anthony Phillips speaks to the fact, and he really wishes he'd listened more closely, but Nick Drake supported Genesis on a couple of low-key dates. And that was at a time when Genesis were at their most pastoral, the Trespass period, and Drake would have probably been pushing Brighter Later.
Yeah, he also supported Incredible String Band several times apparently as well, including at the Royal Albert Hall, but unfortunately no recorded documentation. Perhaps it's the way it should be.
I think it is. I think that the enigma grows. I mean, they've even got to the stage, and they are interesting, but they're releasing Molly Drake's demo. She used to record herself, the mother of Nick. And partly they're releasing these because they think they have clues as to where Drake got some of his phrasing and influences. And I think there is an aspect. I mean, some of those are really sweet, the Molly Drake demos.